In this lesson, we're going to talk about how to debug your web applications and how to monitor each web page and how it's performing internally by using the powerful functionality of Visual Web Developer 2005 Express Edition and ASP.NET 2.0. Now, one of the most challenging aspects of creating web-based applications versus writing Windows Forms applications, at least in the past, was the lack of tools to support debugging so that you could watch the code as it's executing that generates the dynamic web pages, to watch it and step through it line by line. And typically you'd have to resort to writing out trace values at the top or the bottom of your web page so you can get some feedback, so you can narrow down which line or which lines of code were causing problems within your web application. So that was hard enough during development of websites. But then that complexity was taken to a whole other level when deploying the web application. And I personally spent long hours trying to track down obscure bugs that only occurred in certain situations, only to find out that it only occurred on certain people's web browsers who had disabled this and enabled that and so on. Talk about a frustrating, meticulous line of work. So Visual Web Developer 2005 Express Edition makes it super easy to debug your applications during development time. In fact, it works almost identically to debugging tools that you're used to using whenever you're building regular Windows applications in Visual Basic 2005. You can set and manage breakpoints, you can view the values of variables and locals windows and watch windows, and a lot more. Also, ASP.NET 2.0 provides a tracing tool that makes monitoring how well your applications are functioning a snap. Super easy. And finally in this lesson, I'm going to show how to set a default error page that you can use to give the user a friendly notice that something bad just happened, instead of showing them an ugly error page that's generated automatically by the web server. You want to make it very friendly and show them a nice that you're in control at all times. And so we're going to demonstrate how to do that. It's very simple to do in ASP.NET 2.0. Okay, so let's start off by talking about debugging. I'm going to go and create a new website. We're going to call this one Lesson 05, and we're just going to create a really simple example here so we can demonstrate how to set breakpoints and step through code. So we're going to do something like this. My string equals, and let's do this. Let's go back to our interface here. We're going to drag and drop a text box, and we're going to call this first text box, and then we're also going to put a label on here. We're going to call this result label. We're not going to do a whole lot with this, but we just want to be able to write some code that does something a little bit meaningful. For first text box.text and result label.text equals my string. Okay. In fact, sorry to change the game here. I'm going to add one more control. I'm going to double click that, and I'm going to take all this code, and this is a little trick here. I'm just going to move it all by dragging and dropping it to a new event handler. Pretty neat, huh? Okay, so how are we going to work with this code? Say we just couldn't find some subtle bug in this simple code. What can we do? Well, we can set what's called a breakpoint. And a breakpoint when we're in debug mode, so whenever we click this little green arrow to start debugging, what we can do is stop the execution of code whenever it reaches a certain line, and then step line by line through our source code, and then actually monitor the values that are stored in each of our variables or within each of the properties of our objects and so on. So in this particular case, in line 12, I want to stop the execution of the code by placing a breakpoint. Now, how did I do this? How did I put this little red dot here in the left column and then this red line? I merely just clicked next to the line that I wanted to place a breakpoint. I can also use the F9 key on my keyboard. Now, to remove this, all I need to do is click it again, and it's gone. Okay, so I'm going to click it on, click it off. Okay, if I right-click this, I can temporarily disable a breakpoint and then just click it again in order to get back. Now, why would I want to do this? Well, in case I had a lot of breakpoints in my application I was developing over a long period of time, it just makes it easier for me to manage my breakpoints and know that, oh, in the past I wanted to monitor this particular area of code. Okay, so now I have my breakpoint. I'm going to click my Start Debugging button. It's going to ask me, do you want to enable debugging for this web application? Yes. So we're going to click OK. And now we're working in a web browser. But this is not just any web browser. It's a web browser that will pay attention to the fact that we have hit a breakpoint. So I'm going to type in something here and then click my button. And now notice that I have my flashing Visual Web Developer application in the background in Windows. So I'm going to start it. And notice now that in the left-hand column here, on top of my little red ball, I have a yellow arrow, and my red line turned into a yellow line. That tells me that this is the next line of code that's going to be executed. And now I can use my little debug toolbar over here, or I can use the keys on my keyboard to step through the next line of code. So in this case, I can step into the next line of code. So if we had some method calls, this would go into those method calls. Or we can step over method calls and just remain in this particular method, our button one click event. Or if I'm deep down into some method call and I'm not really even interested in what's going on at this point, I can step out of method calls. So I'm not going to click these two buttons. I'm going to click the Step Into button. And notice now when I clicked it one time that it moved to the next line of code. So this line of code is executed. My string should now have the values that I typed into my text box. So notice also as I hover my mouse cursor over the various aspects, in this case the property text of the object first text box, that it gives me this little IntelliSense pop-up to the right-hand side that shows me the values, and I can even use this little magnifying glass and change the type of visualizer. I'm just going to leave it the way that it is because the text visualizer works in this particular case. But if I were like parsing out XML or something, I may want to look at it in a slightly different way. Now, the same is true over here for my variables. In this case, my string, and it shows me the value that's in my string. Happens to be the same value that's in the text property of the first text box. Now let's take a look at the result label.txt. I'm going to hover my mouse cursor over that. Currently the text property is set to label. We never change the default value, but it's about to be set to the value my string after we execute this line of code by clicking our Step Into button. Before I do that, let's talk about these little windows that are typically docked to the lower left-hand corner of our Visual Web Developer 2005 Express Edition IDE. Let's start with the Locals window. So I'm going to click the Locals tab, and notice that it has a list of the objects that are available and the variables that are available within my application. So you can see here my string is listed with the value that it's currently equal to. But then it also has some of these other objects, like me, for example. And you recall in Visual Basic, the syntax, the object me, rather, refers to the current class that we're currently in. So in this case, it would refer to what? The underscore default class. So we'd be able to use this little plus button to drill down and view more information that's contained, all of the sub-objects or the child objects, all the properties and methods that belong to the me object. And you can see there's quite a few, and I can even drill down further into like a cache object and things of that nature. Now, a lot of this isn't going to make a whole lot of sense and not really be useful to us at this point, but as we develop more complex applications, you'll find that this is invaluable to have access and be able to view at any point in time the current state of these particular objects as they're encapsulating various things within our application. For example, you'll notice that the sender is one of the objects that are passed in, and in this case the sender is a button object, so we can see things about the button object. The sender was our button, and we can see, for example, let's see, the text property of it, which was simply button, and if it had a tooltip, we would see it right there, and some other information like that, whether it's visible or not. So we're able to inspect the properties of the objects on our form. Okay? So the watch window is a little bit different. Whereas the locals window gives us everything, the watch window will only give us those values that we want to keep an eye on. So what I can do is just, like, for example, select my string, and I want to monitor the value of my string throughout the course of the execution of the application. So I'm going to drag and drop what I highlighted down into my watch window, and now I'm watching my string. So let's go ahead and continue to run this application. And now I'm going to change this value up to some other wacky characters that I just typed on the keyboard. I'm going to click my button again. Now notice that whenever I re-enter my button one click event, that my string, because it's declared and not initialized, that the value is currently nothing. As soon as I execute this next line of code, it changes the value because there was an assignment to the value of the text property of first text box. So we have quer, okay, that is assigned. And notice that it shows up in red. That means in the previous executed line of code, something changed about this variable. The same would be true in the locals window. Notice how it appears, the value appears in red there as well. That just says that something just changed. Now if I click the step into one more time, notice now that it goes back to black. That means in the previous line of code, nothing was changed about the myString value. So we can continue on from there. But how neat is it that now we're able to watch what goes on inside of our web applications as they're handling the requests from web browsers? Like I said in the past, in the previous lesson, that the lifetime of your web application is a fraction of a second. So it's difficult to monitor what's going on inside your application sometimes. But this makes it super easy, at least while you're developing your applications. Okay, so the debugging tools within Visual Web Developer 2005 Express Edition handle the situation where we're actually building our website and trying to find the problems that exist during development time. But what if we have already deployed our web application and then we get reports from some users that they're experiencing some difficulty, that they've run into some errors on our website, and it only happens in strange, rare occurrences, and we're not able to easily track down the problems whenever we're debugging on our own machine? How can we get some clues to what is actually going on behind the scenes within our applications? Well, debugging and breakpoints only take us so far. What we need to do is be able to monitor our applications as they're in a live production environment. And so the way that ASP.NET 2.0 handles that is through the use of some tracing functionality. And so what I'm going to do is just close this down, and I'm going to enable tracing for our web applications so that we can see some of the neat functionality that's there. So I'm going to go to Tools, or actually, let's see where we got. There we go. Website, ASP.NET Configuration. So this is going to be our first view of the ASP.NET Website Administration tool. And this tool we're going to revisit in the next several lessons. It allows us to configure things about our web applications. It is a separate tool. It's not part of our website, but it allows us to manage things about our website. Okay? So for starters, we're going to click on this Application tab, and notice in the lower right-hand corner that we get this little section called Debugging and Tracing. So we can configure debugging and tracing for our web application. I'm going to click that link, and what it gives us are several options. Now notice that debugging has already been enabled for our application, but we have not enabled the capturing of tracing information. So I'm going to click that right now, and that will allow us then to configure some more details about how we want to display the tracing information that's captured. So I'm going to click this to start off with, display tracing information on individual pages. And we can also then determine whether we should only display tracing information for local requests, meant that we are basically running this from the web server on the same box as the web server, as opposed to all requests, which means that anybody from any web browser across the internet would be able to see the tracing information. Probably don't want to do that. In most cases, it's going to expose some information we may not want other people to see. But we can also sort some of the trace results. We're going to leave all of this information to their default values for right now. And I'm just going to click the back button, and I'm going to minimize this. And then now I'm going to run our application. Let's get rid of that and run our application. And when I do, notice, and I've got a little bit of a difficult situation here because you can see my text box is kind of running into some things here. But I get all this tracing information. So we get these request details. We get the trace information. So all these steps that are conducted during the construction of our web page. So there's a pre-init step, initialization, init complete, preload, begin load, end load, and so on until the entire web page is constructed. And you can see here that it also gives us the time that it took to complete these given steps. Now this may not mean a whole lot to you just yet, but as you get into your farther into your career developing ASP.NET web pages, you're going to find some useful information here, maybe where the holdup is if your applications are performing slowly. We can also see the control tree, and this is the page contains controls, and some controls contain other controls, and so we can see information about those controls and what information is stored within them. We can view any session state, application state, request cookies or response cookies. We can look at the HTTP header information that was sent from the web browser to our web application, any response information, the form collection, query string, the server variables, and all the information that's contained there. So we get this wealth of information about this page request. And every time that we run this page, we might get some slightly different numbers, and based on what information is input to our application with the values of the cookies, these things would be able to be displayed here, and we can monitor and see what is the input for this application. And if there was a problem, like we ran into an exception, we'd be able to see that listed here as well. And we're going to note that in just a few moments here. So I'm going to close that down for now. We're going to expand on this. The limitation at this point has been the fact that we are able to view all that tracing information on the page, but in a real live situation, we would want to see what others are doing on our website. So we need to change some of the configuration settings. I'm going to click Configure Debugging and Tracing Information one more time, and let's do it this time. This time we are going to select all requests, but we're going to deselect display tracing information on individual pages. Okay, so let's now go ahead and save this and click the back button. Minimize our web application configuration tool, and then run the application again. Now notice this time that all the tracing information went away. And this would be good in so much that other users who are actually consuming my website wouldn't be able to see the tracing information. But the problem is I can't see the tracing information either. And the neat thing is that there's actually another web page that we can browse to. So let's go ahead and grab most of this URL and then paste it into our web browser. And instead of default.aspx, what we're going to type in here is trace.axd, which is a special token that, when accepted by the ASP.NET Runtime Engine, knows that we want to be able to view the application trace. So we are actually able to view, you can see here, this application, this page when it was run, and we can look at the details of that page and see the similar tracing information. Okay. Now on a subsequent request, so let's go ahead and refresh that. Let's go back, refresh this, and you can see now there's 2 page requests, and we'll be able to view each one. Okay, very cool. So we can set how many pages are kept and by the ASP.NET Runtime Engine. And so I think our current setting, if we look at our Web Application Administration tool, Our current setting is to only keep the last 10 pages, but we can change that to 20, 50, 100 pages, whatever we wish. Of course, we'll be using up memory every time that we select a larger number of pages to cache and be able to review. But now I can watch and just keep hitting the refresh button and watch as people are hitting pages on my website, or I can clear the current trace so that all of the history is gone, and that as I refresh this page and then refresh my application trace, I can see it again. Okay? So very neat, very useful, and I've used this so many times on my own websites to monitor where the problems are that are difficult to detect whenever I'm working on my own personal copy on my own desktop machine. Now let's go ahead and close this down. There's something neat that I can do here. If I am running into problems, I might want to output some information to that trace screen programmatically. So in this particular case, what I'm going to do is use this line of code, which I've just already written, and I've pasted into my designer. Let's go ahead and get rid of our toolbox so we can see this. So I'm using the trace object. Remember, this is an object that belongs to the page object. So we could do page.trace, or just trace in this particular case. Right, this is something that I wrote. You could use this to debug a problem. I could see at what point is this line of code getting hit in my code, and I can add a number of trace statements to my source code to determine to like, for example, print out the value of variables, or to print out their value at this particular line of code as the code is executing. So let's go ahead and run the application again. And now that I've run it, that page once, let's go to our trace.axd and pick the most recent one. And here I should see in the begin load, between the begin load and the end load, this is something I wrote. I could use this to debug a problem. That was the string that I wrote out. So I can write out messages and put any kind of values that I want to in here that help me debug or keep track of how well or how poorly my applications are performing, where they're running into problems, and so forth. Okay. The next thing that I want to do is I want to demonstrate how to handle problems that occur on my website. So in this particular case, I have added a line of code that I know I can force to break my website. Let's go ahead and run the application. I'm just going to type in Bob and click the button. And when I do, you'll see here that I get this format exception was handled by the user code. Now, unfortunately, I was in debug mode. So let's go ahead and try to get out of debug mode. Let's go ahead and stop the execution of this application. And let's just browse to this. Just hit View in Browser and see if we can avoid that. Okay, so this is what your end users would see if they used their web browser, browsed to this web page, typed in a value that you were not expecting to handle from the end user. So in this case, I was trying to do a multiplication, but I typed in the letters HIH, just whatever I typed randomly on my keyboard. So HIH times 3 equals, well, nothing. I have a format exception. And so you can see here that I get this really informational but ugly error page. Now, we don't want our users to be able to see this type of an error message. We would like to make it look a little bit more like the rest of our website and explain to the user, sorry, there was a problem. We'll look into why this happened. If you keep experiencing this problem, please notify the webmaster, whatever the case might be. We want to put a friendly face on this error message. So what can I do? Well, I'm going to add a new item to our website. I'm just going to add a simple HTML page. I'm going to call this error. I'm going to click add. And on this error page, I'm just going to do something very simple. Sorry you saw this. We're experiencing problems. Please try again. And we might put our company logo, the look and feel of our website, maybe a link of another area of the website that they could try, maybe the link to the mail address of the webmaster and so forth. But it's basically a friendly page. Okay. Now, how can I make that page appear whenever an exception occurs? Well, here we go back to our handy dandy web application administration tool. And I'm going to click this define default error page over here in the lower right hand corner. And instead of use the default error message, I'm going to specify URL to use as the default error page. I'm going to select our error.html. Now with it selected, I'm going to click the save button. The default error page setting has been saved. Okay. So now let's go ahead and navigate back to our web page that we had before. Okay. So here again, I'm going to just type in Bob and I'm going to click the button. And you can see that I get my friendly error page. Okay, so let me close this down and talk a little bit more about this website administration tool. Now, while the website administration tool seems to do a lot for us, it's really just a friendly face, a friendly web-based interface that sits on top of an important file that we talked about briefly in a previous video called the web.config file. And the web.config file is a series of XML settings that define how our application will run, especially some of the features of ASP.NET 2.0, how it'll be applied to our particular application. So you can see here that we have, for example, this custom errors tag that sets the default redirect to error.html. So whenever we made that setting in our website administration tool, when we went to the application tab, clicked on define default error page, that this is what we saw, but behind the scenes it was setting this property here in the web.config file. The same thing is true for the tracing. Is it enabled, and is it only locally visible, true or false? And so there are, for example, every time we click the OK button to debug our applications, this tag was added to our app. Compilation debug equals true. Okay, so some of these things seem very mysterious and very cool, but behind the scenes, at least in this case, all this application is really doing is making some settings within our web.config file, which is really doing all of the work. It is setting properties that the ASP.NET Runtime Engine will use to determine what features to enable in order to allow us to debug our application, to trace through it. Security settings, things of that nature are also managed here and more. Okay, so in this lesson we learned quite a bit about how to locate the problems that pop up while we're developing, or, heaven forbid, after we deploy the website by uploading it to the web server to be viewed by millions of people. We looked at the integrated debugging tools and the really cool tracing tools that are built in ASP.NET 2.0. Then we looked at how to send our web visitors to a friendly error page when things go bad on our website. Finally, we talked about the ASP.NET configuration application and how it is really just a nice friendly interface on top of an XML configuration file called the web.config. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed it, please visit www.learnvisualstudio.net to download and watch over 400 videos just like this one, aimed at all skill levels on many different topics related to C#, Visual Basic, ASP.NET, and more. Thank you.